kind of two parts of this, and one part is the stop, drop, and roll part. Just give people practice at using a way to make messages better. But before that, talk more about why we need to change the way we communicate. Some of this has been in our 3-hour workshop, but I chopped it down. I made this one special for you, Tom.
Thank you.
Roland, you're welcome. I'm sure, like you guys, I only know a few people who really love to door knock or the phone bank. For most people, it's a big chore. And I'm gonna have some links for you to some materials that will help, and we'll get that going to you before things are out. And then part of that is I have a checklist that is really good to do at the campaign office before you go out. All sorts of things that are important about door knocking and just being prepared to go out. More practical things. Of course, I focus mostly on messaging and on how we do this, and try to have a good conversation at the door with people so that you and they have a good conversation. And that's, of course, the biggest challenge. The other challenge we have is that the conservatives seem to be doing very well at convincing people of the most incredibly strange things. And that hasn't changed for quite a while. We've kind of been breaking even with them for a while. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the third challenge is that on our side, we don't do messaging training in any really intentional way like the conservatives do. And what we are told by a lot of consultants who've been doing this for years, what we are told, they're not really giving us good advice. I mean, my feeling is after 20 some years since Newt Gingrich shut off conversation between Democrats and Republicans and, turned the biggest prime directive of the Republican Party politically into owning the libs, we have not been doing all that well. You would think that we would be doing a lot better the crazier they become. So that's kind of what's going on. We're going to look at some ways to make this easy-ish, and I say easy-ish because it's a good idea to practice this. And so the information that's here is worth practicing. There'll be 2 worksheets. We're only going to do one of them, but the other one is handy. So that helps. And another way to practice is we do Monday night webinars every other Monday night. And those webinars are a great way to kind of just get back into thinking about framing and messaging. In fact, Monday coming up, we have Senator John Marty, and we'll be talking to him about the Minnesota Health Plan, which, may have some legs this year. It's getting a lot more sponsorship and all that. And we're going to do something on letter to the editor and writing and social media posting and such. And a lot of times we do things just on the psychology behind communication, although because we're in a campaign season now, we kind of tend towards the more practical. And so that's just kind of where it's at. The other thing is I've had some interest in Southern Minnesota, and Tom said he's interested too. I'd really like to schedule our regular 3-hour workshop. And this is a great way to just really understand what all of this framing and messaging stuff is about. You get a taste of it tonight, but we do a deeper dive. And when you come out of there, you'll be absolutely convinced that we have to communicate differently, and you'll know how to do it. So if anyone's interested, just let Tom know, and I'll try to coordinate with him. And I'd like to get a workshop going within probably, what is April? Probably the earliest would be the end of May. But that still is in good time for all of us. So that's where that's at. Anyway, okay, so knowing how to frame messages will make voter contact a lot easier. And I want you to consider something. This is something I noticed. I was CD chair and or CD3 chair, and I was watching people go out of our offices to volunteer. Many people had never volunteered before. Others were the folks who show up and and are real spotty year to year, even during a cycle. And then there are people who've been around forever. And we all go out and we all do this, but most everybody is pretty terrified of door knocking. This one particular door here gives me, this is the kind of, I think the way that people think about door knocking. I don't really want to do this. Who knows? And then the other thing that makes it weird is we're given these crappy scripts. We're handed a script. The thing says, do this, this, and this. They're invariably written by, staffers who are college students, and they're real bright and they're real smart. They don't have a lot of experience in this. They haven't really been trained in messaging. So they come up with something and it has the basic things, did you talk to this person? Are they Republican or Democratic? And are they anywhere on 1 to 5? And if we think about it, we'll write down what their big issue is. And we say, we sure hope you can support Democrats, and then we leave. And so of course you walk up to the door and the person on the other side of the door sees you coming and they're scared to death that you're going to ask them a question that they don't know the answer to, because you're obviously a political person. You got buttons on you and bumper stickers on your forehead. So they kind of know what's going on, and that scares them. By the same token, you're walking up to the door, you're scared of the voter because the voter might ask you something you don't have an answer to. And that's a scary kind of a thing. And it trips people up. So what we do is we end up defaulting to the easiest thing to do, which is to read the crappy script and then leave, and then think that we have done anything to persuade somebody. Doesn't make any sense. We're just really not prepared for this kind of conversation. So framing can fix that problem. I should say what framing is, and there are a lot of definitions of it, but this one I think is important for what we're talking about. Framing is basically talking about right and wrong. All framing is moral. It's all about right and wrong. The nice thing about that is if you talk about issues in terms of right and wrong, then you can have a conversation about it, and so can the voter, and none of you need to know all of the nitty-gritty.
No seat. It's 2:00.
I don't know what that was. Aliens. No doubt it's aliens. But that's a conversation everybody can have. I think if we start out talking about right and wrong, talk about why we care about things, and we're not throwing jargon out, and we're not listing facts and trying to get people to reason with us, then it puts everybody at ease, and you might actually have a good conversation. And the bad news, though, is that we've kind of been doing it wrong for a very long time. So we haven't been helping ourselves. So basically, my big message or my big question is, why should we change the way we communicate? And as I mentioned before, the party of facts and reason has been unable to do much better than break even against what is now a party completely dangerously off the rails. Conservatives have largely won the messaging war. Almost all issues are now understood in a way conservatives want them understood, talked about in the words conservatives want everyone to use. It's as if liberals and conservatives are playing baseball, but the games are always on the conservatives' home field. Clearly, our methods are not working, and so the question is why? Well, we seem to approach messaging the same way every cycle, and I believe our current methods are grounded more in opinion than science. And to make matters worse, our highly paid consultants give us the same bad advice year after year, and again, we do no better than break even. So there is some science about how to do this, how to approach messaging. And that science started with a guy named George Lakoff. And he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. So as liberals grounded in facts and reality, we believe the words we say will get the voter to think exactly like we do. So it seems reasonable to set the facts in front of people, explain our reasoning, and expect our listener to come to the same conclusion we have. And if that were the case, nobody would be thinking of an elephant right now. Remember, I told you don't think of an elephant, but you thought of it anyway. The literal meaning of the words should have prevented any elephant. This is the way we think. The saying literally what we actually mean we think that that comes across like we mean it, or put more eloquently, what you say and what people hear are two very different things. And that's really important to know, because think about that frame of elephant. In this case, this frame is not a values frame, but it is a frame. It's inside your brain, there are neurons that call up the concept of elephant, along with a bunch of other brain cells that get lit up for related concepts to elephants, like Africa and baby elephants and tusks and such. So when you say a word or when you say something, it's going to light up brain cells in people's heads. We have to be very careful which ones we do that, or which ones we light up. The other thing to know is that much of the time people are irrational. They're not stupid. They're not, trying to be irrational. It's just very few people have been trained in formal reasoning or in science. And even those who have, it's just not the default way that humans think. It takes more energy. People generally don't do it. And most of the waking moments of our lives, we go through life with making snap decisions, many of which are unconscious. So framing will help people break out of that kind of mode and give us the opportunity to, in effect, reach into their brain and turn on the brain cells we want to turn on. Now, the other bad news is that, ironically, the Republicans have studied the science, and this is the one area where some of them actually believe some science. They also have no scruples about lying, misleading, and using some very powerful, unethical, and even nowadays chilling techniques. And with half the country voting for them, no one can doubt the power of what they've been able to do. We can do this kind of messaging better than that. We can do it ethically, and it'll help us. But there are 4 things that the conservatives know that we don't. Number one, they know what I was just talking about, that people don't think like we think they think. They know that facts and logic are way less effective than values and emotion. They also they tell people what they value. That's important. They put their messages in values terms. How many times have we heard the GOP is the party of values? They label themselves such. And they also know something that's very important, and that is that framing and messaging is strategic. And what I mean by strategic is their messages may work in this election cycle. They may be about issues that are happening today, but they always include elements that get at their underlying core values, their worldview. So what happens when they message is they're building this worldview in people's heads over the long term. They put a lot of money into this because they know that if you repeat your message over and over again and using the same words, then those messages become sticky, as it's called. They're going to stick around, and we fall into it. They're so good at it, we fall into it. The classic example that George Lakoff uses is tax relief. And why is it that taxes are framed as a burden? Isn't that just paying for what we've already decided to do? Isn't it just responsible for us to pay for the things that we have decided we want? So that, but we hear from our electeds and even ourselves, we all talk about tax relief also. So we have to not be doing that. So again, I think we can use the science to message with honesty and integrity, and in that way communicate the way we see the world to voters. And the advantage of being strategic about our messaging is down the road. The big payoff comes when our candidates go to the door and the voters know what a Democrat stands for and know that the Democrats are not opposed to the things that they need every day, as the Republicans tell them. We don't do that. We're primarily tactical. We think about what we have to do today to win this election, and that is a huge mistake on our part. And there are people like George Lakoff and people in the field like me, and there's a whole group in Michigan doing this. and in Arizona and in a few other states. And it's catching on. It's catching on, which is good. So let's talk a little bit about frames. And let me pop this up. So think about frames, these ideas that live inside brain cells, actual real physical brain cells inside your head. And frames can be thought of as a container that holds all of what you know about something. Little chunk of cells that knows about elephants and knows about healthcare and knows about empathy, things of that sort. Frames can also be thought of as a point of view or a perspective. It's the way to understand something. And that's important because in politics, it's important to try to change the other person's point of view, give them another way to look at the world. Frames can also be thought of as context, how an idea fits together with others, because every frame that there is connected to other ideas. We want to make sure that when we use a frame, the other connected ideas are ideas that are ones we want people to be thinking about, rather than connecting to some idea that's not. I'll give you a good example, democratic socialist. Literally, factually, there is a definition of democratic socialist that is out there. However, for many people, if not all the people from the World War II generation, and even afterwards, just because the word socialist is in there, that's all they think of. And the Republicans love this. They just loved it when Bernie said, I love Bernie. And he's usually great on messaging, but that was a big mistake. And when he said democratic socialist, I could hear the party poppers going off in the conservative strategies offices going, gee, they walked right into the trap. And also frames, kind of in contrast to being connected to other frames, frames can be a boundary around things. Like some things belong in a frame and some things don't. So if I say that I'm at a hospital because I'm sick and a doctor walks in and a nurse is there talking to me, all of that belongs in the hospital frame. If all of a sudden a shark comes in and says, anybody know where the cafeteria is? That doesn't belong in there. This is a silly example, but the frame you choose can set boundaries around a conversation. I'll do one more real quick. In immigration, the conservatives, their frame is a crime frame. In a crime frame, the refugees or the people coming across the border are criminals. The conservatives are the heroes protecting people from the criminals, and the liberals are the terrible villains helping the criminals across the border. If you switch to a different frame, we know these people are refugees from really horrid conditions. And in a refugee frame, we're the heroes, we're helping them out. And the Republicans are the villains for locking their children in cages and separating them from their parents. And in each one of those frames, there are only things that belong in that frame. So if we switch it to the refugee frame, only some things belong in there. There's no room for the crime frame. So there's that. Lastly, frames can be thought of as a story. Okay. And so again, these are things to think about. We do go into this in greater detail in our workshop, and we also review this in the context of different issues in the Monday night webinars, which are free. So there's that. Okay, so if that's framing, then what's a message? And they are two different things. A message is really simple. Every time you open your mouth to speak, you release a message, period. That's what a message is. You say something, it hits somebody else's head, and they hear what you say. That's a message. The words are going to light up frames in our listeners' brains, whether we intend it or not. The only question is if those words will trigger our frames, the ideas and the values that we want people to try on, or are they going to turn on our opponents? So that's another good example of that. Gun laws, common sense gun laws are pro-life. That sounds really clever. Somebody said, oh yeah, that's great. people not killing self with, or people with guns. Well, that's pro-life, not what the conservatives think. But of course, you just mixed an issue that is absolutely core for conservatives, and using the words pro-life just took away from your message about common sense gun laws, because now what are people thinking of? They're thinking of abortion instead. So anyway, that's an example. I want to stop and see if there's any questions, because I went through that really quick and there is more depth to it. So if you have questions, I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has some.
So George, I don't necessarily have a question, but I was having done some door knocking. I've had some tough issues come up at the doors. And I think if you've done door knocking and you think of what were your tough issues that you had to deal with at doors, I would make a list of those. And then we can maybe circle back toward the end, or maybe in a group session, we can talk about, what's the frame that you want to use for that. So I mean, I put down, like, I've had abortion come up at the door.
Yeah.
And, we want to frame that as women's health versus the pro-life, pro-choice thing. And I've had gun control come up, if you've mentioned that. And, really it's gotten, from a Democrat perspective, it's gun safety. And if you look at the polling, and we don't want to get into that, but, 80% of Americans are for gun safety. So, but those are if you can make a list of those tough issues that you think you might encounter or have encountered in the past, that might be helpful to talk about those. Maybe not in this session, but at some other session, we do some more training in person.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do that. And keep in mind, there may be some things you're not going to overcome. It's very, you're not somebody who's, anti-abortion is going to be, you may not convince them at all. That's possible. That's okay. You're not, you can't get everybody. You're just not gonna. But what you can do is plant seeds and get your message out there. It's possible that person, there may be somebody else in the house, they may hear your message, whatever. But keep that in mind. Our goal is not to get everybody. That's impossible. Anything else? Anything confusing in that? I'm hoping it makes sense. Okay, well, let me share the screen again and talk about, okay, so how do we do this? This is kind of the meat and potatoes of how I want you to think about how you're messaging and speaking with voters. And we call it stop, drop, and roll because that's an easy way to remember the steps involved. Most of the people who do this training have one way or another for people to remember steps just like this. And so this technique helps you understand what you're up against, avoid doing things that help your opponent, basically drop what doesn't work, and craft messages using values to bring voters over to our side and solidify our worldview over time. That's the strategic part. Now, like stop, drop, and roll when you're on fire, this is kind of counterintuitive. Many of us, and I've done this a lot before, we love to do the facts and the reason. We open up and we come off with facts. We present them in front of people and we show them our reasoning, and just consider that they're crazy if they don't come to exactly the same conclusion that we have. And that people's brains just don't work that way. They can. Einstein can think rationally more, or could rationally more than most folks. Some people can do it, but most of the time it's just not the way most people think. It's not, they're not stupid. It's our brains we're not evolved to do science and reason. That kind of came about at some point, but most of what goes on in our brain happens at an unconscious level, and even a so-called lizard brain kind of automatic level. So we're kind of new in the world of living things in dealing with a brain that's capable of being rational, and it's just not something that comes naturally. So just like when you're on fire, you have to think. You need, rather than running, which is what you want to do, you want to stop, you want to drop to the ground, you want to roll around and put the fire out. So I want you to think of this messaging like that. We're not only going to learn to do things, we're going to talk about not doing things that hurt us. Okay, so the first step is to stop and don't just respond, which is what we do quite a bit. A lot of times we feel we need to respond to what conservatives say. And I just want to say at the outset here, and you can write this down, you are under absolutely no obligation to respond to something that a conservative says. None at all. Even if you're in an interview, if you're a candidate, you're in an interview and the interviewer asks a question and your opponent says something crazy and challenges, well, tell me this, tell me why. You don't have to answer what the conservative says, because that's what they want you to do. Because every minute you're debunking their crazy stuff that they make up specifically to make us crazy and to make us respond. Every minute you're doing that is a minute you are not on your message. So that's pretty important. So don't just respond, just learn to check yourself. Say, okay, I'm going to back off. I'm not going to do this right away. I'm going to think a little bit. Now, this is something that if you're a candidate, you'll want to do this on the issues you're talking about well beforehand. So this kind of helps you develop that messaging strategy for each issue. The first thing you want to do is ask the question, what are people saying? This is a brainstorm at this point. You want to write down on a piece of paper all the things you're hearing about the issue that you're looking at, whatever that is, healthcare, gun safety, roads and bridges, whatever it is. What is everybody saying about this? What's your opponent saying? What's the GOP saying? What are people on the street saying? What are you saying? What do Democrats say? Because as I've mentioned, a lot of things we say aren't very helpful. So write all this stuff down. Pay careful attention to words that might be code words. You see this a lot. Republicans have a lot of code words that really mean racism. They learned eventually that they had to stop actually being overtly racist. So they have code words now that signal to their followers that, yeah, I'm as racist as you are. And that's what I'm really talking about here. And as you look at all of that, are there any, which of those words or phrases, what is it that people are saying that has been picked up and that's just bubbled to the top? For example, I remember when the first voter ID laws were starting to come out, and I labeled it voter suppression, and I got a ton of pushback from people, and that's what it's called now. So it's, but that phrase became dominant. What are the dominant words and phrases out there? On your side, on your opponent's side, you could just go back over what you wrote down that people were saying and circle those things that have hit the media, that are on people's lips. Make sure you know what those are, because if they're not the things you want to say, you don't want to say those. We'll talk about that in the next step. The next thing is, out of the things you wrote down, what is your opponent's frame? What, as they're messaging about this, have they put it in a frame? This gets easier the more you learn about framing. But again, what kind of story are they telling? What are the boundaries around that story? Who are the actors in that story? How does this fit in with other ideas? And get a feel for that. This is the part that takes more study. But when you get this is really important, because then we'll see in the next reason or the next step why that's important. Then ask the question, is the discussion in the right frame? And that could be because maybe we own the frame. Maybe it's just not a good one. Maybe the opponent owns the frame. And in that case, they may be talking about this issue in a way that detracts from what the real issue is. Let me give you an example. Voter ID it started out with voter ID. Then it became voter fraud. And of course, it was voter fraud because an interesting thing about conservatives nowadays or Republicans nowadays is they will tell you exactly what they're doing by what they're accusing us of doing. You see this all the time. So they accuse us of voter fraud, which, if you know the facts, it's on the order in a decade. I've read a couple studies where they looked at least a decade's worth of voting, and it turns out that it never breaks 100 people nationwide. Never breaks that number in 10 years. So that's basically 10 cases a year. We're talking about millions of people not being able to vote with Republican policies. So they're going to call it voter fraud, which then enables them to go ahead and do the voter suppression they're doing. But they focus on voter fraud, so we don't focus on voter suppression. We argue with them. Well, there is no fraud. Okay, we're not really getting anywhere. We don't need to talk about voter fraud. That's what they want the issue to be. The issue is not voter fraud. The issue is voter suppression and vote nullification. We talk about that. They can talk till they're blue in the face about voter fraud. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time or any time on that. We can go, yeah, that just isn't true. Here's what's really going on, and spend all your time on what's really going on. Does that make sense? In this case, we now put the discussion in the right frame, and we are talking about the right issue, not the distraction issue that the Republicans have put out in front of us. So there's that. I have available for you, and I'll put this in the chat. This is a document that will help you do just what we talked about. To recap, think about what everybody's saying, write it all down. Everybody, you, your opponents, people on the street, and the media, write all this stuff down. And then it goes through some other steps besides what I have on this slide here. So it's a good way to practice. You can this is a Google Doc. Download it as many times as you need and do one for each issue. And that helps. Okay. The next step is called drop. And this is where we try to unlearn some bad habits. So I'm going to do this with an example here. This is what we'll do when we're talking to voters. Well, I support curbing emissions because 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real. And let me tell you all of the problems with that message. There are all sorts of problems with this. Number one, this is full of facts and logic. Okay, there's a place for that. There is a place for it. We have to know what the truth is. We do have to say it. The problem is usually that's all we say. And for a lot of people, facts and logic will just bore the pants off them. It's just the way humans are built. So there's that. The facts and logic here is 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real. Don't use conservative frames or code words. Don't repeat their messages. That's what that stop portion was real handy for, because now you wrote them all down. Now you know what it is they're saying. Don't say that stuff. Whatever you do, even if you're going to refute it or debunk it. Because again, debunking it, what happens is in order to debunk it, you have to say it. And when you say it, you're also stay in their frame, which is, basically that's exactly where they want you. They want you to debunk what they're saying because that keeps you off of a frame you ought to be in. And they just love this about us because we don't do this. We don't get to our message. They can pull us off it by getting us to fight with them. It's why Bill Nye, when he debates the creationists or the climate deniers, it's why that isn't helpful, because he's staying in their frame. Again, don't forget your message and don't take the bait. Understand that what your opponents nowadays will do. In the old days, Tom and I, we were born back in the age of the dinosaurs, and back then, Republicans and liberals could sit and talk to each other for the most part. I mean, it wasn't, big lovey-dovey, but you could actually have a rational conversation. That is not the case today. And so they are going to bait us every chance they get. If you get a chance, there's a thing called the Go Pack memo. Learn where the Republicans are coming from on this. Yeah, it's not a good place. It's all anyway. And again, on this message, going back to the message up top, I support curbing emissions, which may be something that people don't know what that means. Possible. But do you support it because 90% of scientists agree? Or do you support doing something about the climate crisis because people are going to get hurt? People are going to mass migrate because they can't live where they live because they're flooded or they're getting burned out. And you care about those people, and those people's lives are important to you. You don't want them to suffer. You don't want them to lose their homes. That's why you support it. Talking about 97% of scientists mean that what you're doing is you're trying to prove that it's real. What's their frame? Their frame is it's not real. So here, you just are engaging them inside their frame that it's not real because you say 97% of scientists agree that it is real. And just for fun, the words climate change were, it was a scientific term, but it was also a scientific term at the same time as global warming and a number of other terms. And we were all using on the left global warming, which was getting a whole lot of traction. So a guy named Frank Luntz, who is the guy who came up with this GoPack memo and is the architect of the turn towards nefarious messaging that is happening on the right, he said, well, let's call it climate change. That way, first off, global warming sounds like that's bad. You know, nobody wants us to fry. So climate change, well, that's natural. The climate's always changed. We've had ice ages, we've had hot spots. So it's natural. That's just what happens. And so what did we do when he was successful in getting all the Republicans to talk about climate change? We just adopted it, and that's what we talk about now. That's how insidious it can be when you know how to change a frame and you don't have any scruples. You can still change frames with honesty and integrity, so keep that in mind. So anyway, that drop phase is important because it works with the stop phase again, because you've identified what everybody's saying. Now you're going to go back in the drop phase and look at those things that you don't want to say. Try to uncover the frames that the conservatives are using. In the climate change example, the frame is climate change isn't real. Their words, their position. And then so now you know what to do in that part of it. The other thing is remember, we need to spend virtually all of our time on our messages phrased in the way that we want them phrased, framed in the way that we want them framed, because we only have precious few moments at the door. If you're a candidate, precious few moments in front of a crowd or on TV. You want to use all of those for you. My friend Antonia Scatton, who worked with George Lakoff for a while and is now in Arizona doing work there, she says the most important thing to talk about is yourself, not the other guy. Keep that in mind. Again, you're under no obligation to answer any questions that your opponent puts forward. An interviewer might say, well, your opponent answered a good question there. What is your answer to that? And you have a choice. You can answer it if you want to, but stay in your frames, or you can pivot. I mean, politicians do that all the time. People who are really skilled at messaging, they pivot. If the question is a stupid question, don't spend any time on it. Does all that make sense? Any questions on that?
I had a question.
Yeah, Adam.
So I have heard that people switched from using the term global warming to climate change because people would say like, well, how is the global warming when it's winter out? So I'm not actually sure which term to use at this point because I've heard negatives about both.
There's a lot, there's a lot of talk about that right now. Climate crisis has caught on, which I think is good because it's at least not global warming and it's not climate change. But climate crisis adds it adds urgency, but it also kind of may make people think that the problem is too big to solve. And luckily for you, we have a webinar coming up on this exact topic. And Lee Hobart Stocking, a great guy. I don't know who else has been. I think Karen, you might have been on some of our webinars. I'm not sure. No? Okay. I know Betsy has. And Ellen, you've been on there, some of those webinars too? No?
No, but I know him from MN350 and Sierra Club Actions.
There you go. He's great, right?
Yeah, right.
He's great. Hobie and I talk all the time. We're working with Greg Layden on this also, and this should be really interesting. So, Adam, that would be a good one to attend. Again, these are free. That's going to be on John Marty's next Monday, doing letters to the editor on May 2nd, and on May 16th we're doing a webinar that we're calling "Create and Deliver Compelling Messages and Frames for Climate, Energy, and Justice." And Hobie is really, really good at coming up with really good words that at the same time can tell you how urgent things are, but also give you hope and agency that you can do something about fixing it.
Mhm.
He's really, really good. And so I highly recommend that.
So George?
Yeah.
One of the things that maybe you could put in the chat is the link to your upcoming webinars.
Yeah.
That might be good to share so that people can join in. And just my comment on your climate change, global warming statement is the frame I like to come at it from is how is it affecting my grandkids?
That is a great way to do it.
Because there's a lot of issues that the Republicans are pushing that affect our kids and our future generations out into the future a long ways. And there's a tipping point that we're going to hit. And at some point, we're never going to be able to go back. And my grandkids and their kids are going to be the ones who are have to deal with that, not us.
You know, that, and what's great is that's an opportunity for a story done in it with a technique called future projection. And I kind of call it time projection because you can run it both ways. But future projection is, here's how I see it, which I think are very powerful words. If you're talking to somebody and you think they might disagree with you, you can go, I hear what you're saying. Here's how I see it. My grandkids, in the future, my grandkids, they're going to have kids. And they're going to be living in the world where all summer long, the air is going to be smoky because of fires. The water up in the boundary waters and in other parts of Minnesota is going to be unfit to drink because of the tailings that leach into the mines. You got to be some careful about that where you're at in Minnesota, saying that. But, paint this picture of what a future would look like with either your opponent's policies or your policies, or both, and say that can work. Or you can work in a reverse. When my grandfather grew up, there were birds everywhere. Where I am today, where we are today, we are missing about a third of those birds, actual physical individual birds flying around. There's a third less birds in the world now. And there's less tweeting going on in the spring. And when my grandchildren are there, we could lose half or more of the birds. That kind of thing. So I am moving back and forth in time. Very effective way to get people to think. Stories are always good, and candidates, very, very important. If you tell a story, make it a story that you heard from the person who experienced it, who told that to you. No third-hand stories, no fourth-hand stories, no making up pink Cadillacs for welfare queens like Reagan did. Don't make stuff up. The more that you've heard this from the person who experienced it, that will mean that you'll always come across telling that story authentically. You will look authentic when you're doing it. It's a subtle thing, but remember that. Okay, let's get into the role part of this, and this is where we'll spend a little bit of time. I don't want to keep you here all night. We'll go over this, and maybe we can do, well, let's see if you want to do the actual exercise or not, but let's get into the role section. Okay, so in this section, we want to roll with a well-framed message. The first thing you want to do, this is kind of obvious, what's the issue you're talking about? Or what goal is it you want to achieve? If you're an activist, for example. But what is it? Identify it clearly. Make sure that the issue you've identified is not one that your opponent is trying to distract or use as a distraction.
George,
Then,
are you
yes.
sharing your screen?
Oh,
Sorry.
concept. There we go. So what is your issue or goal? And then the next one, also very easy. How would you accomplish it? And what I mean by this is when you think about this, this is an action. This is something very specific, very concrete. The issue is the I'm trying to think of the right word. We are missing some birds. Birds are being killed off. Okay, that's the issue. How would you fix this? How would you fix this goal? How would you accomplish it? Well, I would support House Resolution 395 on the protection of the migratory bird nesting areas at Pelican Lake, or, very specific, because that's in the end what we're after, right? We're either trying to get a candidate elected or we're trying to get this bill passed, something specific. Those are the easy ones. What's the issue and what are you going to do to accomplish it? The harder part is, why do you care? Why do you care about this? And why should anyone care about it? And so what we do is we want to frame with values, because values are strategic, but they also help people understand issues in this moment. That right there is our truckload of values, which is just fun. I did that up for a union thing we did. Here are the values. These are ones that I've picked. I spent a lot of time looking around because people would talk about democratic values, and I tried to go look them up, and dang, nobody's really tried to write them down. It's crazy. So I started writing them down, and I grouped them together for no other reason than they seemed like these would go together, and it made the list look shorter. First off, liberals are all about empathy. That's where our moral compass is guided probably mostly by empathy on our side. We think about other people. We want other people to do well. Paul Wellstone said it the absolute best. We all do better when we all do better. That's a wonderful way to talk about it. That's a great frame. Everybody's doing great. And everybody will do even better if everyone's good. The next one, empowerment and protection. Actually, liberals, that's the role of government. The liberals, that's how we see government. Empowerment and protection. Conservatives only have one of those, and it's not empowerment. Conservatives think that the government should, and when I say conservatives, I'm talking about today's Republicans, and I'm fully aware that a number of very smart and good people have left the Republican Party or are still trying to change it and bring it to some kind of morally good way or position. So I'm kind of using those words interchangeably, but I do know there are those people out there, and they are very helpful for us right now. But they think the government should have a military to protect us from people coming in and attacking us, and they think that there should be police. Beyond that, protection does not extend to conservation, with exceptions. Obviously, it does not extend to making sure that there are safe gun laws. It does not extend to a woman's body. That's not what they don't think that these things are important. And empowerment, they don't think the government should be empowering anybody. At least that's what they say publicly. Their actual prime directive, as we know, is number one, to concentrate wealth in as few hands as possible and protect that wealth. And if by their actions, that's what they show. But otherwise, empowerment, like saying, you know what, I think kids should have, we need Head Start as pre-K, or at least all day pre-K for our kids, because our kids will have better futures. We know that every every bit we invest in kids at this age comes back to us fivefold, tenfold, whatever the number is. Empowerment is important. We empower the FDA to make sure that our food is safe. We empower each other with Pell Grants or with Social Security if you're old, all sorts of things. We think it's just fine as citizens to say, you know what, we can have nice things. We want these things. We want our people to do well. And so we're going to invest in ourselves. We're going to make our place a better place. Republicans, that's not part of their thing. It's all you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps, which if you've ever tried it is impossible. And I won't read all of the rest of these. There's common good and some other, that's another big one for us. Inclusiveness, something that Republicans talk about but don't actually practice. And public support for private success. I put that in there because George Lakoff looked at this list and he says, if you tell him anything, tell him that. That's really kind of the empowerment thing. Public support, private success is important. And one that I thought was interesting was excellence and fulfillment, meaning that we think everyone should be able to achieve whatever they can achieve. We'll help them out. And they also need to live fulfilled lives. Just because they're living and they're getting food and they're breathing, they may not have a great life. Let's try to do what we can to make other people have fulfilled lives. So this is hoping that's making some sense to you. There is a, I'm going to put a link into the chat. And this is for an exercise. And what I'll do is, because we can decide whether we want to do the exercise or not, but let's, wrong one.
I want to ask a question here. What are the Republican values? So you look at this, our values, what are their values?
Their values are, just make sure I'm getting you the right one. Yeah, okay, this is the same one. That's a good question. And we go into that in a lot more detail in the workshop, but let's talk about that for a moment. There's a part of what's in this book. Stop sharing for a moment. Part of what's in this book, don't think of an elephant, this is the newer version, is an examination of that, because the Republican worldview, Lakoff says that you can use a metaphor of the family to talk about the differences between Republicans and Democrats. And there is a strict authoritarian way of raising children. The strict father idea is what he calls it. And for probably most of history, this is how things went. The father ran the show. The wife supported the father. The kids obeyed the parents. No talk back, no questions, nothing. That's kind of dominant. Now, this is overgeneralizing. This does not apply to everybody. I'm not saying that all conservatives raise their kids this way. And on the liberal side, it's different. It's more of a nurturing family, one where the mother and father are more equal, although the guys don't do the dishes as often as they should, and such. But it's more equal. We want our kids to be fulfilled. We want them asking questions. In all of that stuff about the family and those kind of values that are in those family models end up informing policies and positions that are taken. It's a way of thinking about it. So for example, on the conservative side, if you work hard, you are morally good. This is a huge one. If you work hard, you are a morally good person. An unfettered free market rewards people who work hard. Therefore, the market is moral. By the obverse of that is that if you don't have money, if you don't have wealth, it's because you didn't work hard. It's your fault. You failed. You are not morally good. Is all of this kind of ringing a lot of bells about Republican messaging? And then well, kind of lost my train of thought there. I'm 67, that happens. But that's the idea. So you see that hard work thing show up an awful lot. You know, you are irresponsible if you don't have wealth. It's your fault. It's all up to you as to whether you succeed or not. And we all know that's not true. I have people in my life. We all have people in our lives, either friends or relatives, and some of them just can't work for one reason or another. Physical, mental handicaps. Maybe there are only certain things they can do, which are low-paying jobs. They might be young, where they're not going to give you a CEO position, but they'll let you flip burgers all day, right? So, we know it's not true that you just lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. And also, the Republican worldview leaves no room for the fact that, let's say I'm a Black person and I grow up in a place where it's not safe, where I'm sleeping in the bathtub, where there are all these issues that have come up because we've forced basically Black people to live in one place and not other places. And so that has its effect on one's mental ability to tackle the challenges of everyday life.
Mhm.
And those kind of things we want to, on our side, we want to do away with. On the Republican side, that's their fault. Ellen.
Yeah, I can add an example, I think, or tell me if this is correct. Right now, Minnesota school funding is being discussed at the Capitol. And Minnesota ranks close to 50th with the number of guidance counselors and mental health staff we have in our schools. And so the Republican plan is to give Anoka Hennepin $0 for improving our schools. And so I contacted our state senator, Jim Abler, a Republican, about the need for funding for guidance counselors. And his answer was, oh, definitely. Anoka Hennepin should definitely lead on that. They should hire a bunch of people and encourage the other districts to do that too.
Jim Abler said this.
Yeah, he said that to me and to a couple other people. He responded to that in an email in that way. So sort of like like you said, like the father blaming the system, the children and the family for not being successful and expecting them to turn it around all by themselves without any extra funding to hire anybody new. And we need thousands of new mental health people in Minnesota, but they are not going to fund one person, period.
Yeah.
That's something really key in his messaging I've noticed, is he says he supports it,
Yes,
but there isn't any funding path to support it. So
that's right.
yeah, there's a disconnect.
So you
Yeah.
answer, or so you ask the question of him every time you see him. Are
Yeah,
you willing to put your money? I'm really glad that you support this. Did you support the bill? Are you supporting the bill to provide that funding? Because that is really all that matters, Jim. And I've met Jim. He's not like a super evil guy or anything.
oh no, he's super nice and has
Yeah.
lots of friends, and that's how he wins.
Yep. And
But
he's
he
a
takes
union supporter too.
But he
Right.
takes that role of, like you said, concentrating the money into the business world and into themselves and not giving it out to the people who need it. And the idea that, oh, if you need something, do it yourself.
Do it yourself. Yep. And that stuff can't stand.
No.
Okay.
I have a few comments if.
Yeah, Carrie, absolutely.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I was late. I was wrapping up at the Coon Rapids City Council or Coon Rapids Commission's thank you dinner. So I was there to
And
thank
Carrie,
all
what are you
the
running for? Your
people on the
candidate.
commissions. So I am running for the Minnesota State Senate in District 35.
Okay.
So that is, Abler is my opponent, which is why they're talking about Senator Abler. And he has lots of friends and he knows people. And I noticed one thing that he does also is he'll help individuals with certain specific issues. But that is helping that one person or two people or three people. And then, so you're still not voting on something that's going to provide funding that can help everyone in the state, right?
Right.
So in thinking about this, and it's probably a lot to think about tonight, but how does it connect to door knocking? I'm thinking about taking this messaging that George is sharing and thinking about what maybe some of your personal stories are and what your values are and what really connects with you. And connecting that to your values. It would be great for you to have, a personal story that you'd want to share with somebody if you felt comfortable. And then, you can ask, and then I'm going to provide probably a framework. I'll create a framework or work with Tom to provide a framework. And then it's about asking a few questions too about what that person's values are.
Yes.
And then if there's a way to connect that back to yours and to my values, connecting it back to me as in, like, Carrie is somebody who has a lot of empathy. I've seen her do this, or I've seen her take this action on the city council. I think we could have a really nice framework for having a conversation at the door. Because Tom and I talked about it being more of a conversation and also asking questions and listening, rather than it feeling like you're giving a sales pitch, because people today are so bombarded by ads and advertisements. We want it to be a conversation rather than a sales pitch, if that makes sense. And
No, it
then,
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah. And my other key thing right now is the campaign has a lot of positivity, and I want to keep a very positive framework on all of our issues. Like, what are we for? What are we going to do? And how is that going to make things better? Versus talking anything, just like George said, there's no point in talking about any of the Republican views or issues because you are just repeating the things that they want heard anyway. So we want to talk about what we're for and have it be a positive experience.
It's interesting you brought up sales. I was in sales of television equipment for years, and I asking those questions of people up front, as many as you can. A lot of times, I can't tell you how many times that saved me from stepping in it.
Right.
I would hear something somebody would say, and I go, "Oh, I was going to say this. I'm not going to say that now." So
right, you can ask up front, and then you find out where they're coming from, and then if there's any type of connection, make it. And if they're just an angry Trump loving person, you can just say, "Oh, thanks, have a wonderful day."
So what are the questions to ask? What are those questions to ask? Because
that I don't know yet. I'm thinking
I've asked people, what are your important issues? And half the time you get nowhere. You get nowhere with that. So,
or it's the barking dog next door. It's usually something really close to home.
Well, they don't even answer. I don't even get that half the time.
Right.
So,
what's the question to ask?
So
Yeah.
A lot of people. Oh, go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
When I started door knocking for Catherine Eckhart, it was like, okay, it was like throwing the lamb to the lions, right? Because we had no training and we were just kind of winging it. But after a while, you start to see things that you can start having conversations around with people. When you walk up to the door and you see, oh, they've got the blue thin line flag flying. Obviously, that's a sign, right? So they're going to be interested in law and order. So you could ask them what their views were on, it's a way, it's a conversation, or is that there's that 52-foot RV sitting in their front yard. You're probably going to get a conversation around fuel prices right now. So there's things that you can look at when you walk up to the door that are kind of keys that can trigger some of the issues that you think may be coming from the door. And you kind of get a little bit prepared for some of it. And obviously, if there's a Trump 2024 sign flying in the flagpole, you're probably not going to get anywhere there. But you never know. You
sometimes sometimes the spouse is not of the same persuasion.
True.
There is that. There were a lot of good comments. Let me respond to a couple of those before we go on. As you walk out, here's kind of one that sounds hokey, but is actually a way to get in. You may be walking up the door and notice that there's a great garden in front of the house, and maybe you're a gardener, or maybe you don't have to be a good one. Maybe you're a gardener and you can go, I see your garden. It's really, really lovely there. And it's something else. And then as you're talking about issues, you go, you being a gardener, sometimes you really have to nurture some of the plants. Some of the plants, the soil's not right for them. In the summertime, we've been having droughts. So there's things we have to do to make those plants do well. We have to mend the soil. We have to add something to it. We have to think more about watering and all that. And, that's kind of like the way I think about Head Start, that, all of these kids, if they just hit kindergarten or first grade and they don't have all the skills they need, Head Start's a way to give them, just like amending the soil, it's a way to give them the things they need so they succeed when they hit school, when they hit kindergarten, first grade. And we know this works. It works great. So, you connected with them, not necessarily directly with the shared value, although, that's how you connected, but you used this thing you saw to do it. So that's something. The other thing is something curious that I saw, and about the Republicans have been so successful in the messaging that they've done, that the messaging has been largely the same now for close to 50 years. The frames they use, the stories they tell, all of these things follow a very scripted thing that now is built into every brain of the conservatives out there. But the interesting thing is if you offer an alternative, you can open a conversation and talk about your values or about right and wrong. When you open a conversation, sometimes you just give them a different perspective. You can say, again, powerful words, I hear what you're saying. Here's how I see it. And then, and this happened to me because I was with a client and he and one of his crew were talking about homeless people. And they're going, I just don't know why we do anything for them. Why are they just could get, if they can stand on a street corner, they can go out and work, kind of thing, and all of that. And so I don't know why we give them anything. And some of them are mentally ill, but that's just too bad. It's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? And so I just walked up and I go, I hear what you're saying, but so what do we do with those people? And then I just shut up and let that sink into their head for a minute. They never thought that you do anything with them. I go and, they go, well, I don't know what, we don't do anything. I go, do we, leave them under bridges? Do we let them starve to death? What do we do? And give them a different way to look at it. And that's kind of an extreme example, but if you give someone a perspective that's different, what I find with Republicans, because they've only thought about it one way their whole life, it's never occurred to them there's another way to look at it. It's shocking when you see it happen, but you give them this other way of looking at it, and you will hear the words from their lips. I never thought of it that way. Now, you're probably not going to convert them in that moment, right? But if you're telling them an alternate way to see things, and Tom is telling them an alternate way to see things, and Adam is doing it, and on every issue, we're offering an alternative, and we keep doing that, and we know what our values are and what our frames are that work with this, and we do that, we've planted seeds, going back to our growing metaphor, we've planted seeds in people's brains. And that's the kind of strategic messaging that really helps over time, especially because most of the time we're not talking to far righties. We're talking to independents, middle of the road people, who don't have a fully formed worldview. They don't have the liberal worldview. They don't have the conservative worldview. They mix and match depending on the issue, depending on what their friends told them or what they heard on the news or the not news.
Well, and I think that we think about us here on this call are super involved. So we know the political issues and the different bills and the things going on. And a lot of folks are just going about their lives. And I think even very specific questions, rather than what are your top issues for the state, it's more like, what are your favorite things about Minnesota? And what are the things do you think Minnesota should be really good at? And I'll come up with some questions and I'll write a bunch down. But I think asking something specific versus like, what are your top issues for at the Capitol? Because a lot of people even think about that. Is
Right.
Catherine, do you have your hand up? Or is that old?
No,
Catherine,
I do have my hand up,
right.
just waiting my
Catherine, you
turn.
go. You go.
Okay. I was just wondering if there's some value or some power perhaps in having our three candidates who are all three strong Democratic candidates. If we could have a unified message for all three of them, because then when we're door knocking one to the other, we're saying the same thing. And it would, you know, it would seem that the issues are general and are plentiful enough that we could come up with. When I door knocked for Catherine, we never talked about more than three things at the door. It just seemed that that was the best thing to do. I always led with open questions, not a question, but leaving it, tell me about this, versus what are you thinking, or tell me the other way. Anyway, my point being that I think there's some value in the three candidates sitting down and say, here's what our message is going to be as we go door knock. First of all, we can use door knockers campaign to campaign then. We don't
That's
have
right.
to do too much
Have triple.
changing.
Mhm.
And don't you think so, Ellen? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
and-
that's a great idea.
and also, you know, easy to research the topic. And I think it would be pretty easy to come up with 3 or 4 general topics that would be of importance to everyone at the door.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep. That's the end goal, is to have it. And in your races, in those candidates' races, there are going to be very specific issues that are specific to Minnesota. And we're needing
Right.
to message about those. If we're messaging using our underlying values, there's kind of a ride along message that goes with it. And maybe that's a good segue. Let me show you the last screen that we're going to look at, and we can come back to this. I don't think we'll do this exercise, but I'll show you what it is. And then we will discuss more on it. But again, remember before I said, determine what the issue is, something, you know, important. And it was interesting. An anonymous grizzly just showed up. That's this thing. Okay, anyway. And then how would you improve it? Again, something very specific. What do you want done? What do you want? A law passed, a change in a city ordinance, you want a donation, whatever. But how would you specifically improve the situation? So that's not hard either. So look at this next part. Why do you care about this issue? And that's got to come out in what you say. This list here, or the one that I had on the screen before, which it is, and this is available to you. These values help you if you include these in your messaging. So no matter what specific issue you're talking about with a specific solution, try to talk about it from within these values as frames. So for example, in healthcare, it's a terrible thing when people can't get the healthcare they need, and they end up having these problems that by the time they have no choice but to walk into the emergency room, it's often too far along for the doctors to do anything. Or if the doctors do anything, it costs 100 times more than it would have if they were able to walk in when it was first noticed. I feel that people lose their dignity. I care about their dignity. I care about their quality of life, their ability to lead fulfilling lives. I think it's just fine to make sure we invest in the health of people so that we protect them and their families, and that we do it in a way that doesn't bankrupt them. And as you can see, I'm picking words out of that list to throw into my message, because doing that now, what you're doing in this specific message about this thing right now today, we're building that foundation of what our worldview is and what our values are. And Carrie, you mentioned the values that we have, the values that they have, and then saying, well, look at our values and try those on. The interesting thing, and we didn't get into it here, we get into it in the workshop, is called biconceptualism. And and a part of that is that, you know, Republicans have empathy also. They have empathy for their children and their in-group. Their group is a little more close into them, doesn't necessarily extend to the world outside, but they still have that thing of empathy. It's a value they can understand. Protection, that's a value. They protect their kids. They will protect their communities with police. That's not an alien concept to them. None of these values are alien concepts to people. They just don't apply these in politics. So if, and I put in here kind of half joking, bonus points for including the mention of people in any way. If you can illuminate these values as in a story about people, even if they're generic people, I want all people to, you know, live in peace, whatever you say, you know, in any way that you can work people, specific or general, into your messaging, that wakes people up. Our brains are, we are social creatures. It's our biggest thing about us. And the fact that you talk about people will get people saying, oh, I know people too. I'm people. So are all the people I hang out with. And the stories you tell are people are stories that are relatable to everybody. A whole lot more relatable than, well, you know, 97% of the scientists agree about yada, yada, you know. So what we're trying to do is, if we get them to see things from our perspectives, all of these values are perspectives. If they see things from those perspectives, again, they're not alien, but so they already have, those cells are in there. Those brain cells are holding those concepts. You just lit it up in response to our position and our solution. And we keep doing that over and over, and not, and like, what was it, Catherine said, you know, if all the candidates are doing this, you know, not only just the specific issues that are for SD 35, but also adding these values in, adding these concepts into what you're doing, you're doing double duty. Does that make sense? Use this form to do that, to just try it. And basically try to make some messages, pick an issue, and just snatch words right out of there and try to see what you can do to make it happen. There is an example in the document too, and there's a link to this document that that we'll put in the chat also. And this example talks about healthcare, and there are also some other examples down here of messages. And it sounds kind of hinky, right? It sounds like, I care about the common good of all our children. Okay, I mean, maybe it sounds hokey, but you know what? This is important stuff to say, because this will open up a question. What do you mean the common good? Or what do you mean dignity for all people, regardless of skin color or whatever? You know, ask, when you use these words, you open up a conversation. So this is an interesting exercise to do. We do this more heavily in the workshop, but you can do this in the privacy of your own home. See how it goes. So I'll shut up and we can go on with what we were talking about.
You know, I got a question. I haven't been door knocking for a few years, and I just think things are going to be so different now with the whole Trumpism thing, the election fraud, the bias in the news, all those things that people are going to hate politicians, that we've already got this wall kind of out there before we even get to the door somehow this time. I don't know. How do you see things changing this time around, or being different this time around?
Karen, I do think my campaign, it's probably going to be a little different. I don't envision, honestly, knocking on leaning Republican or strong Republican doors. I know many of you feel like you need to knock on every door. It's just with my particular candidacy being quite progressive and being a woman, I can very much see, if we were at a strong Republican door, we're actually going to encourage them to go vote against me. So we maybe not doing that type of communication. We'll see. We can talk about it more.
Well, you never know sometime. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't know. Everybody, even with
And
your,
the van isn't always accurate. So you
right,
still have to be
that's where I was
prepared.
going. That's not always accurate. at all.
Exactly.
And
But
I
if
think George said it, or somebody said it before, is you can have a wife, the husband and wife think
Right.
totally different. So who do you know? Who are you going to get at the door?
But I can tell you, if they ask, are you Republican or Democrat? And you go Democrat and they start yelling at you, you're not getting anywhere with them. You can just say, thank
another.
you, have a great day, sorry to disturb you, and start walking.
Yeah, I've gotten
backwards.
that before too. Yeah.
So
Well,
have I in
and because of
2020.
And because of
So-
resources, you have to do political triage. I mean, you have to.
Right.
Not everybody. I mean, I do know the city council member in Brooklyn Center, Dan Ryan, knocks on every door, as he has every election since he was elected. I think it's now 14 years ago. Now, in that time, because he's done this for 14 years, he has turned some people who would otherwise vote against because he's a Democrat, he's gotten them to vote for him. That's 14 years of work. And a lot of times you have to be somebody who's willing, and he got elected the first time he ran. So he's an incumbent. It's easier for him to do that. But most of the time, you do not have the resources to do that. And for us, if it's a strong right winger, we probably aren't going to get him. You don't want to have the half-hour conversation with that person, just like you don't want to have a half-hour conversation with the person who agrees with you and is going to vote for you already.
So
Right.
one of
It's
the things
different in
that,
your personal, like with your family, you probably want to have that conversation because you're hoping to eventually build that be able to communicate and connect about it. But in this case, you're right, exactly. I mean, my city council seat, I won by really getting out the vote of Democrats, DFLers, and progressives. And I think that this is going to probably go along the same lines.
that's just what I was gonna say is that the goal is to really get the vote out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to hit every door. We just got to activate the Democrats because it's a midterm election. Some people may just sit it out, and we got to make sure they don't sit it out.
And Jerry had said the DFL vote drops 4% in a midterm and the Republican only drops 2%. So if we can mitigate that and get that 4% to not drop and get people really excited about this
Mhm.
race and a progressive to vote for, I think that that's gonna make a difference. How long is it scheduled for? I was just curious.
I don't remember how long it was scheduled for, and I don't want to keep people. The over on in the chat, and just a suggestion for you, at the bottom of the chat, over to the right, there's 3 little dots next to the smiley face. Click that, and you should have a save chat button or save chat choice. Do you? Or is it just me?
No, it's there.
It's there. Click save chat, and it will save the chat with all the links that I threw in there.
Okay.
And somewhere on your computer, exactly where, I'm not sure. But I
It
think
says-
it's
It's
search for
actually
chat.
It's in your Zoom folder.
Okay.
Right after you hit save chat, it says save chat, show folder. So you
Oh,
could
there
click
you go.
and show folder and it will show you where it is.
Perfect. Yep, there it is. Shows up right at the bottom of the messages.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, and go ahead
Wonderful.
and look for those. You can check out the webinar schedule at, rather than giving all 3 separate links, you can just go to the website and they should be on the right, in the right column, and that'll get you to the registration for each one of those. And there's also an Eventbrite page. You can, if you get to one of the events, that way, at the top, you can click either the logo or I think the words Connections Lab, and it'll give you all events we have on one page. So are there any other questions? I don't want to hold you guys here all night. Threw a lot at you. Was it helpful? Any other questions? You can always contact me separately via email that I put in there too.
I just want to say thank you, George, and thank you, Tom, for getting this set up. And thank you to all of you for coming and staying late on what is tonight? I don't even know. A Thursday evening.
It is.
And
I'm
I will
sorry.
definitely follow up too. I'll connect with Tom, and I'm thinking we'll write up like a little one-page
Mhm.
thing, kind of built off of what you've shared with us, George, that's specific to this campaign, and get that to you too.
Tom has gotten pretty good at this, but if you need help, call me. But Tom has been one of the brightest pupils in the class.
You're exaggerating a bit, but
No, I'm just trying to get a free beer out of you.
well, I can do that.
I may be an idiot, but I'm no fool. Thanks all of you for coming.
Thank
and
you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate
Gotta
it.
go.
All
And
right.
come to the webinars. They're fun, aren't they, Tom?
Mhm.
They are.
Okay.
You learn a lot of stuff from George and the other people that he hosts on his webinars. It's pretty amazing. And if you listen to it enough, it starts to kind of sink in.
Isn't that weird? All right, everybody.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Have a
Bye.
great night. Good luck
Good
and all.
night.
All right. Bye-bye. connectionslab.org